Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 349, and today's guest is Chris Gardner, partner at _VC. One time could be luck, two times, okay, maybe you're onto something. But in the case of Chris, he has been part of several acquisitions, so there is something deeply there in terms of his ability to pick the right company to join or the right company to help co-found. There is no denying it. Based on his track record as an operator, there is an obvious translation to his current position as a venture capitalist. This episode is another fun walk down Boston tech memory lane as we talk about some legendary companies that were acquired, like edocs, an early e-billing and customer self-service applications company, M-Qube, an early mobile messaging and content services company, ExtendMedia, a white label video platform, and Paydiant, an early mobile wallet tech company that powered payment apps for Subway, Harris Teeter Supermarkets, Capital One Bank, MCX, and many more. What I also find really interesting is how Chris's background spans across both product and marketing, where he led both entities at companies. Perhaps I'm wrong, but it is a skill set that I haven't seen too often. Chris is currently a partner at Underscore, a firm that is investing in pre-seed and seed B2B software founders. The firm recently announced a new $58 million Fund 3. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Chris's background story and how he got into the tech industry, the stories and his role in the companies previously mentioned, including being a co-founder of Paydiant, their impact on mobile wallets, and the company's acquisition by PayPal, and what he learned while working there. How Chris became a VC and the details on what he is targeting in terms of investments at Underscore, pitch advice for startups and the importance of storytelling, how you need to think about compensation structure as a company scales, and so much more. Okay, just a brief word from our podcast sponsor. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Chris. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. Super fun.
I'm so excited to talk to you because we've got a lot to talk about. There's going to be quite the journey down memory lane here of great companies that have built and scaled in the Boston tech scene that ultimately led to an exit, which I wanted to use that as a starting point for our conversation. So I think a lot of founders, they think about, hopefully they're thinking about building a company. They're not thinking about the end of the road. I'm putting that aside for obvious reasons. But the most logical exit for a company is probably an acquisition. Some companies may grow up and go public, which would be phenomenal. But
Yeah.
if you look at the numbers, it's pretty, acquisitions. So you've been through the process multiple times as, part of the leadership team, part of, be a founding team. So what advice would you have for founders on that process? Because I think it's a mystery for most founders. Does a biz dev guy from a larger company all of a sudden call you up? Is it a strategic partnership relationship initially? So what has your experience been?
Yeah, look, it's all of the above, right? We like to say that, the ideal outcome is that your company gets bought and you're not selling your company. And so, ideally you want it to be organic and come in from the outside. And you mentioned two ways that it could happen. It could be because you have a partnership with an existing company. Sometimes it's even a customer. Sometimes it's a competitor that wants to kind of roll up a couple of companies in the same space. Sometimes it's a much larger company that wants to enter a space that they're not in. If your company's not doing great, sometimes it's an acqui-hire where what they want is not so much your revenue and your customers, but they want all your AI engineers or all of that stuff. And so there are a lot of different reasons you get acquired.
And what are some of the common pitfalls, like things that you don't want, like it's very time consuming, right? And then a lot of times it doesn't even end up working out. And so what are some of the mishaps?
Oh gosh, dude, we could do an entire conversation on what can go sideways, in that alone. There's all sorts of pitfalls, right? I mean, company approaches you, they say they want to buy you, and that assuming you get through these early stages of the conversation, that you enter something called due diligence, where they go through everything about you, your background, your customers, your revenue, your business, your software. I mean, some of the ones I went through detailed code reviews where you have engineering literally reading your code to see, if you're competent developers or not. So there's all sorts of ways kind of along, before you even get to like negotiations and price and kind of all of that stuff, there's all sorts of things that could go sideways. And it's a long journey. I mean, I'm trying to, some of them were a long time ago, but this can take a solid 6 months, from beginning to end by the time, the check's in the mail. It's not a short or easy process typically. And that's outside of a situation where you might have multiple people bidding for you. And then there's the art of negotiation and all of that stuff. So it's complicated, it's exciting, it's crazy stressful, it's all consuming. And sometimes it ends up the way you want it, and sometimes it doesn't. It kind of depends on the trajectory of the company and all that stuff.
All right, well, let's rewind the clock. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Uh, I grew up in Newton, Mass. I'm kind of a Boston boy through and through. I grew up here. I went to UMass. As a child, I was a tinkerer. My dad would give me old machines, old cash registers, an old tape deck, and a screwdriver. And from like age 7, I would like take that stuff apart and muck around with it. I mean, I was super curious, read a lot. But I think the thing that I remember the most was really liking to dig into devices and ripping them apart and figuring out how they work.
What was your first computer?
My first computer was a Mac Plus. So that was a little square one. It was like I think it was like 2 generations into the first Mac, but after the Apple IIe and stuff.
Very cool. So you went on to study communications at UMass Amherst. How did you get your career started and ended up in tech?
Yeah. So I majored in communications at UMass, which means I kind of learned how to speak and write mostly. And getting out of that, and that was a long time ago, 88, it was a recession. And I said I like to work with my hands. I actually did construction work all summer, every summer, like all through kind of high school and all through college. And when I got out, it was a terrible recession. And I actually started doing that for like a year because there was no way I was going to live at home and I wanted my own place. But that turned into me going to work, getting into real estate a little bit, to working for a property management company. And I was doing all sorts of stuff. I was leasing apartments and collecting rents and doing stuff. And then they said, "Hey, we need to computerize our business." And they bought a Mac, and they bought a piece of software that came on floppy disks and a manual that was about this thick. And I raised my hand to help implement it, right? Which meant me reading the manual and installing it and getting everyone on board. And that was it. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the software business. And so I stuck it out at that job maybe for another year and then switched. But my first job in tech was actually inside sales.
For what company?
It was a company called Cambex way back when. It was actually a public company in the Boston area. They were kind of high flying back in the day. They made memory cards for IBM mainframes. And I was in classic boiler room, kind of dialing for dollars, calling, heads of IT, asking if they want to buy better memory, cheaper. And I did that for about a year. And then someone within that business was looking for someone to do comms. It's like looking for someone to do marketing communications. And I raised my hand to move sideways and went into marketing. And that marketing job turned into kind of product marketing, turned into me wanting to be a product manager because I'm nerdy, by nature. And so that was pretty quickly out of college. I kind of fell into product management, which is really my kind of domain in tech.
All right. Well, I think on LinkedIn, it like the first job, if I remember correctly, was a VP of marketing job at OmniBrowse.
Yeah, that was not my first job. That was
Well,
not.
it's just the one that's listed. Like you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
list every job.
I wonder why that's it. I mean, I was just giving you a little story, years and years before that. So actually, I went. I was actually at a company long before that. I was at Cambex, then I was at a company called Dragon Systems, which is the early street speech
Sure.
recognition. Yeah,
Yep.
that Nuance acquired, and
I used to use their software.
I ran corporate comms for them.
Okay.
And then I kind of went to another company. There was a consultancy, but they wanted me to be a product manager for a newsletter, product and all that. And that got acquired by Gardner Group. And then from there, I went to a company called PC Docs that was run by a guy you may know called Larry Bond, another
Yeah.
another UMass guy, and he was the
General
CEO of
Catalyst.
that. And I went there to be like webmaster, web product manager for their document management software. And that was how I met Larry, who of course was one of the early guys at General Catalyst and a whole bunch of other stuff. Super accomplished guy. Um, and it was so I'm losing track there. And then it was yeah, and so I'm trying to remember where I went to. Oh, after that was when I went to OmniBrowse. So I was at PC Docs, and then one of the guys, one of the other product managers, joined this little startup called OmniBrowse, and I went with them.
All right. So this ended up getting acquired by Microsoft and became MSN Mobile.
It was acquired by the MSN mobile team and kind of it was the guts of it. So this was back in the day, way back in the day, where data services on mobile devices meant you getting stock quotes and horoscopes and stuff on an alphanumeric pager. And these guys stood up a service that you could subscribe and get kind of the latest news and stock and horoscope and all this other stuff. And they built a whole server thing, and they deliver the messages basically via text to alphanumeric devices. And this was an acqui-hire, so they basically took out the company early for a few $1,000,000. They wanted the engineers, and they built it into the MSN mobile platform because they were starting to. I think it was the first iteration of MSN Mobile.
Okay, so the next stop is now this is where my memory kicks in.
Yeah,
So edocs, if I it was it Natick or Framingham where their office was?
it was in Natick. Yeah,
Natick, yeah. So
yeah.
I went into the offices
Actually,
at
when I
one
joined, I
point.
think they're still in Wayland, but then they were in kind of the Apple Hill, and then we moved over to
Yes,
Apple
Apple
Hill, where kind
Hill.
of
Yep.
MathWorks does the whole thing now. MathWorks was just one little building back then.
So I started my recruiting career in 1998. So I was probably, whatever, 1 or 2 years into my career in that world. And we were helping at edocs. And I went into your offices and
Oh,
they
geez,
gave
we
me a
probably bumped into
tour.
each other. That's so
Probably
funny.
did. And I even remember, I don't know why I remember, like you guys, you're like, lava lamps was like your thing, like your symbol, right?
We had lava
Right?
lamps. I still have one.
Okay. And I
I
just
still
remember
have
you
one of the
guys,
lava lamps.
like when, like the print edition of the Boston Globe was still like a thing that people had delivered. And there was, everyone was hiring in 98, 99, the .com.
It was
Like, so
crazy.
you guys had a huge a full page ad with the lava lamp, like edocs were hiring. It was like the big help edition of the Boston Globe.
Oh,
So
it's
anyways,
not
that's my
funny.
memory with the recruiting side of the equation.
Yeah, that was my first kind of super cycle experience, right? I mean, 99, things were bonkers going straight up. And then of course, dot-com crash and all of that stuff. I think we actually filed our S1 to go public, had to pull it and kind of all of that stuff. But it ended up I think I probably learned more at that job, full stop, than anything else, just because of the ride. It was kind of early in my career. I was in product management, but I also got to run an engineering organization while I was there. Kevin Laracy, obviously, is one of the founders. Another guy named Jim Moran, Chris Kanakaratna, who ended up founding Virtusa, which is massive, was another one of the founders. But the kind of the quality of people, like so, we hired Mike Massaro, the CEO of Flywire, right out of Babson. He was at edocs.
Huh.
Rob Orgel was there. He's the president of Flywire now, and I mean, I worked with Rob at M-Qube too, and so it's just that particular company. I mean, the amount of folks that kind of came out of that over time was pretty awesome, but it was a long time ago, so most people don't remember it.
But revolutionary what you guys were doing too, like customer self-service and e-billing.
E-billing, I mean, we were among the first to even think about doing that. It's like, it sounds really, really quaint right now. Hey, don't send a check over the mail, pay your bill online. And we had a whole platform for doing that. Payment stack, everything.
Which I don't know, like Boston doesn't take enough credit for so many things that were revolutionary at that time that became the norm.
I don't know what it is. Is it because we're too self-conscious? We don't
I
beat
don't
our
know.
chests. I think that's the
Like,
we're too busy working.
didn't open market create the e-commerce like buy button? Like
They
some like
kind of did. They kind
yeah,
of did.
like they have patents. Don't
And the
like
head
they
and
did. I
the head
mean,
of product that I worked for when I joined edocs was from open market. I named Ted Morgan.
Ted Morgan, yes, Skyhook Wireless.
Exactly.
Oh, he's fantastic. Okay, so edocs gets acquired by Siebel at the time before they were
Yeah.
acquired by Oracle.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
And I stuck it
Okay.
out about 6 months.
Okay.
I was so this was kind of, I didn't when I got acquired before, in that Microsoft, that was a little thing. They were basically acquiring the other two guys. I wasn't part of that. It was just they acquired the company as an acqui-hire for the tech guys. But edocs, that was the first time was kind of at a decision point, do I stick it out or not? And I kind of think I kind of stuck around 6 months. But three of us, me, Rob Orgel, and a guy named Joe Paratori that sadly died several years back. All three of us moved, got kind of pulled that we had a board member in common with M-Qube, a guy named Bob Davoli, and he kind of pulled some strings and got the three of us to kind of move en masse into executive roles over at M-Qube.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so it was
So M-Cube, another amazing company that
crazy,
is
right? Like,
crazy. The people like so people that have had on this podcast, like Lars Albright, David Chang, Jennifer Lum. I mean, and Mike Tryon is from there. Like, just what an
guys,
amazing
all,
team.
all
And
some of my
so,
favorite, all some of my favorite people. And then Rob Orgel was there, right? He's the president of Flywire. Andy Miller and Ishwar Priyadarshan, those guys founded Quattro Wireless. Sold, Rob was there
sold it
too.
to
Sold to
Apple.
Apple, spent time at Apple, like working straight directly with Steve Jobs. It was just, the gang was crazy.
And now like he owns part of the Sacramento Kings,
He does indeed.
Andrew Miller. Yeah.
I think
So,
he's still
okay.
there. Yeah, he's in
Well,
Manawatu town, just a different town, different coast. He's all West
right,
Coast.
right, exactly. So, all right, but so revolutionary product. I mean, if my memory is correct, uh, people didn't know behind the scenes of American Idol with the voting and the Deal or No Deal when they did the Magic Case part of the segment of the show where consumers could text in their whatever and win. Like that was being driven by M-Cube, right?
It was, and then that guy Joe Paratori I mentioned, he was the SVP of ops there, and I remember, like, staying in the office till like midnight, like those first few nights of American Idol, just hoping to God that our platform didn't fall down, when the votes kind of came through. And it was a nail biter because no one had really kind of done that, right? This is all being done, all being done via phone and text messaging, and it was just the scale, of course, back then was just bonkers.
Oh,
Very
and
innovative
then
stuff.
another successful acquisition by VeriSign.
Yep. Yep. And that was another one where you were starting to get a theme here. So I punched out pretty quickly on that one, kind of inside of 6 months. And it was, I think between that one and the Siebel acquisition, I pretty quickly realized that I'm a startup guy and that, I like the early stage and I like companies that are, less than a couple hundred people, and once you get in when you get into these big organizations with politics and hierarchy, and half the company is spending more time worrying about their next promotion than they are doing work, it becomes less attractive to me. And so I punched out to go do another one.
All right, ExtendMedia.
ExtendMedia was, so this is, think of this as like white label Hulu. So Hulu had just kind of started. So this is early in the video streaming days. Kind of, we had like Netflix, you had Hulu, and what we had built was a platform that was white labeled that would let other people run things like that. So Disney could then run their own platforms before Disney had their own platform. Verizon could, or AT&T could, and things like that. A guy named Keith Kocho was the founder of it. He was based in Boston, in Newton, and he'd been at it for well over 10 years, kind of doing stuff in and around this space. And then they brought in a management team to kind of help drive an outcome and help do it. And we were all in Newton, and the whole team was in Toronto. And so I was kind of going back and forth. I was the head of product and professional services, and I was going back and forth to Toronto kind of every other week. But that was super fun, actually. I mean, I like that space too. Got to know people I still talk to, that were some of the first heads of digital, like at NBC Universal and people like that, that were kind of, we'd be selling stuff too. And so it was, and that ended up getting acquired by Cisco.
So before we get into Paydiant, like what I thought was interesting about your background that I don't think I've really ever seen, at least too often, was the combination of running marketing and product. Oftentimes you see just product or product and engineering, but not marketing and product. So I thought that was an interesting combination that you were running at a lot of these companies.
Yeah, it's funny. And at the time, I have to admit I didn't do enough research to know that was strange. I kind of came up as a comms guy and a marketer, and then kind of made the switch because I was nerdy and had the opportunity to, but always had one foot in each domain. And I think it's part of the reason I tend to favor outward facing product managers. In other words, product managers that spend a ton of time talking to customers. And so it's like, I think I'm kind of a product marketing, customer voice of customer product manager more than I'm here's how to, implement this API product manager, although I ended up running engineering groups too, even though I'm not an engineer at all. But
All right,
it's an
so
interesting combination. But when I think there are reasons why it works, and especially when it comes to things like voice of the customer.
all right, so did you always know that maybe like you were part of the leadership team at these companies, but eventually start your own company?
Um, no, if I'd be lying if I told you I had a dream of starting my own company. Kevin, while we were wrapping up the acquisition of ExtendMedia, Kevin had already been kind of toiling away at Paydiant for I think over a year. He lives like 3 minutes, even now he lives like kind of 3 minutes from my house, and he had already kind of mocked up software that would let you make a payment with the QR code by using your phone to either using your phone to show a QR code or being able to use the phone to scan a QR code on a device. And he had already worked with some offshore engineers to kind of get a transaction flow working. And mind you, this was before there was even a QR code reader on the phone. Like we had to write our own QR code reader. This was kind of pre Alipay type of stuff, and it was pretty visionary, and it actually worked. And I was like, I'll do that with you. So and both Joe Paratori and I kind of jumped in with him to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this is 14 years ago now, 2010.
Yeah, yeah, long time ago, and it was definitely ahead of its time. And you could even argue it was a hair early. But I think that's the time. That's the time to do that stuff. It really, I mean, it only became a thing once QR code readers were kind of completely built into phones, and what happened in Asia in particular really kind of triggered people using it. And of course, the big one in the US was Starbucks was the one that kind of made it a de facto way to conduct a transaction in some retail situations.
So what did Starbucks do that made that
It was
shift?
their app, right? And they weren't using a
Hmm.
QR necessarily, but they were using a barcode to scan for their loyalty program.
Got it.
And for years, it was the most successful kind of mobile phone payment type, full stop, like in the US.
Because Apple Pay was released in 2014. I looked up the day. It was October
Yeah, I was gonna
2014
say
was it.
2015, but 2014, I think you're probably right. Yeah.
So how were you able to get early customers to understand what this was if this wasn't mass consumer adoption already
Yeah,
like
it
this
was so
is
this was old school, and it was actually it's the funnest it's the most fun I've ever had as a product manager, because at the time, again, it seems almost embarrassingly silly now, but at the time it was freaking magic. Like we'd go in to the payment orgs at big companies like Kohler's or Walmart or whatever, Best Buy, and we'd sit down with all their grumpy point of sales team, that have, that they update that every 10 years, and the technology
micros.
really are, yeah, micros and NCR and whatever, and all this other stuff, and often custom ones for those big guys. And we'd always, no matter what, start every meeting by setting up a demo and making them try it. It was just people that had never seen such a thing in their entire life would be like, what? And they'd scan the QR code, and the app would come back and say payment complete. And we were running live transactions with our server. We'd have a little hotspot that we'd set up on the counter. And we were running kind of live transactions, and people's heads would explode. And again, it's silly, but it was. And we started every meeting with that, and that would almost always lead to some sort of kind of piloty thing, because it was just so obvious. It was so obvious to everyone that maybe it's QR codes, maybe it's not, but we're going to be using our phones to pay for stuff, and we need to kind of do something on it. And so we spun up pilots with huge companies, right? I mean, big fast food companies. We worked with a company called MCX, which was backed by Walmart and Best Buy and all these other guys. And so we got involved. We had a deal with them to kind of become the backbone for what they were doing. And so that was our early traction.
Well, so I researched the customers. So you had Subway, right? Harris
Subway, of
Teeter, a
course. How could I
grocer,
forget
Cap.
Subway? Yeah,
Yeah. So you could pay with your phone at Subway.
that's
Is
right.
that?
Yeah, in
Yeah. So
fact,
I
you could
mean,
order. You could do all. This is all order ahead too. So it was one of the first, and we helped them build that app. It was one of the first kind of order ahead integrated payment apps ever.
and then with MCX, like you became a mobile wallet, like an Apple Pay at that point.
White labeled, right? And
Yeah,
so,
white labeled.
yeah,
Yeah.
the
Like
idea
you
is that
didn't know
we didn't have
Paydiant.
any brand or anything. They'd use our
Yeah.
technology stack. And so we had a whole bunch of the kind of MCX guys in various stages of pilots and all that stuff when we got acquired.
But again, another thing created in the Boston tech scene that it just flies under the radar, like the mobile wallet. Like Paydiant had a big piece of that.
Yeah, no, we were certainly part of making that happen for sure.
And the amount of capital that was raised was around 35 million, which
That sounds about
maybe
right. I
back
don't
then
remember the
was a
exact
lot,
amount. That was a lot of money back then, though, right? I mean,
I guess. But in comparison to now, it would be like what, 300 million raised? Or like, I mean, like, we think of what
well, I
Stripe
don't
has
know about
raised,
no
right?
compared to right now. It's probably about the same. Compared to 2020 or 2021, it would have been 300 million or something. So,
Right.
yeah. I mean, remember,
Okay.
this is 2010, so this is like, this is so edocs, right? Was kind of right through the dot-com bust. We kind of, this, Paydiant started coming right out of the kind of the Bear Stearns 2008, 2009 meltdown. So it was just post kind of the second big meltdown. And
Okay. So
so
the acquisition by PayPal,
that was 2015,
and that
right?
they were still
No,
owned
yeah.
by eBay just for a short amount of time before the
Yeah, we got
spinoff
there
officially
just
happened.
just before the split was consummated and PayPal went public. And we joined almost at this exact same time that Dan Schulman joined the company.
Okay. And then Venmo is so oh wait, Venmo is acquired by like I obviously did a lot of homework.
Yeah,
Venmo
you're
is
gonna have
acquired.
better command of the dates than me, so
Like
thanks
I'm
for
like
doing
because just the
homework.
whole payment structure of Braintree, Venmo, and PayPal, and what you guys are doing. So Venmo was acquired by Braintree in 2012 for
Yeah.
26 million, which you look at that and you're like, wow, what a steal for Braintree, right? The fact that Venmo is what it is now. Braintree was acquired by PayPal in December of 2013 for 800 million. And then um, Paydiant is part of this whole ecosystem with PayPal that has built out this juggernaut of, ended up being pretty much backbone of mobile payments.
Yes. Well, I mean, when you think about the user base of both Venmo and PayPal, that is a platform that you can turn into ubiquity, right?
Right.
At Paydiant, we weren't there yet. We had a whole bunch of really, really big customers and pilots and stuff, but we didn't have users. And it's, especially when you're doing something in consumer, you know, there's two ways to build a big company. One is to already have a whole bunch of users and then build a new product leveraging an existing user base. The other way is just to go bonkers and try to build it from scratch. And Venmo is one of those just rare companies that built something from the ground up and it went viral. I mean, to hear you could do a whole podcast talking to the founders of that. But my understanding is that generally they were as surprised as everyone when it went straight up. And in my view, the innovation was a social network around payments, right? I mean, it's back then, it's like, hey, we had a drink, a little drink emoji, and kind of all of that stuff, and it just leveraged this virality and everything. But PayPal had and continues to have ubiquity. Like almost everybody has a PayPal or a Venmo account, and that gives you lets you do all sorts of cool stuff.
So you were stuck around for a good chunk of time, like maybe
I
four
stuck
years
around, so
when.
I actually loved PayPal, and so one of the things that happens, when you get acquired, if you're on the executive team or your founder, sometimes, they make it worth your while to stick around. And that was the case for, a couple of years at PayPal. But I stayed well beyond that. I actually loved it. Like if for somebody who never thought I'd last or want to hang around, at a big company, I was there at an exciting time. I still have very good friends from them. Like I had friends now on the West Coast. I was going out, every 2 or 3 weeks. By the time I left, most of my staff was actually in California, and so I felt like I kind of needed to be there. But I got to do stuff I never dreamed of doing. I actually got to lead the peer-to-peer payments product. I had people way smarter than me, kind of under me doing all the real work. But the original PayPal product, I got to run a product called PayPal here, which is PayPal's version of Square and all that stuff. And so I really got a front row seat at great products, but more than that, I got a front row seat at doing something at scale, which I had always been a startup guy, where you're hunting for your next meal every single quarter, and to be at PayPal and the PayPal peer-to-peer payments product, you push a new build out to production, in like a minute, whether you screwed it up or not, compared to what we do in kind of enterprise software and all of that stuff. And so it was just, being able to, deal in millions and billions of users and dollars and all of that stuff was actually really, really good for me. And I loved it. The only reason I left is that through all of my startup career, I've been traveling about 50% of the time. And so, as I was always doing sales. It's, kind of founder stuff, people on the senior team. We're always selling, especially at startups. And so I basically lived on the road, and it was even worse at PayPal, and because it became international travel a ton. And I was just, I needed to spend more time at home. I wanted to be back in the Boston area, and I really missed the early stage stuff, which is really my jam.
Did you have any like major takeaways from that experience from the early days of Paydiant through the PayPal acquisition? Like anything?
Um, hone that down for me. I mean, obviously I learned a ton. I think my takeaway is that I kind of resisted sticking around big companies like the plague, because I had always pegged myself as an early stage guy. And the PayPal experience ended up just being so rewarding just from an experience perspective, that I guess I would probably recommend if anyone has the opportunity to do both. I think that the perspective you get working at a company at scale makes you better at everything, even in the early days of company, because it's no longer hypothetical. What it looks like when a company gets huge. You actually have some experience operating at that level, and that's it added a lot to me. I mean, I learned almost everybody I worked with or that worked for me was smarter than me. And that was another thing. It's like, because it was just people that had been on the West Coast hammering and kind of the big company ecosystem for a while. And it's just a skill set that you can't read from a book.
I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, so you're a partner at Underscore now. So what led you down the path of becoming a venture capitalist?
People. I did not have any plans to become a venture capitalist whatsoever. I left PayPal, thinking I was going to travel a little bit, and the pandemic hit, so I was locked in my house. After about 6 months, I got bored and started reaching out to my Boston friends just to kind of light the network back up, because I'd been kind of in this tunnel vision for like 10 years between Paydiant and PayPal. Got reintroduced to the gang, to Michael Skock. Northridge had been an investor in a couple of companies I'd been at, and so I knew Michael. I didn't know him well, but got reintroduced to him. We had a lunch. I started sitting in on pitches and kind of like, hey, sit in this fintech pitch. You tell us what you think. Because it's actually part of our investing process is we bring in outside experts to help us kind of evaluate startups, and they were using me in that respect. There was one I liked a lot. I wrote kind of a small personal check, just kind of angel check alongside them because I really liked it. And I did it for a better part of a year, like, kind of hanging around the hoop and sitting in on pitches and all of that stuff. And at some point, lunch turned into a dinner, turned into them saying, hey, do you ever think of maybe becoming a VC? And I kind of hummed and hawed and said no a couple times. And ultimately, I realized I was having so much fun, still pandemic days. I was having so much fun in the times where I had calls with this team, and I just freaking loved the team, right? It's like Lily and Rich and Jimmy and like John Pierce and all these folks. Like I realized, I loved hanging around the people, and I liked the content of the job. Like for a guy like me that has ADD, like talking, every day talking to multiple super smart people trying to do the impossible. It's like the context shifting actually kind of feeds some part of my soul in a weird way. And so I liked it, but more importantly, I joined because of the team. I don't, and that was it was kind of full stop.
Well, if people aren't familiar with Underscore, like what are the details on the firm? Like I know you announced a new fund recently, just like everything that people should know.
Yeah, we're early stage software investors. We invest in B2B software at the pre-seed and seed stage, and that means we're kind of making an investment anything from a couple $100,000 up to maybe $3 million kind of max, but early. Often we're the first investors, first institutional investors into a company. B2B only. We don't do consumer stuff, mostly because all of us are former operators. We all kind of worked in industry. Most of us, Lily spent some time at Facebook, but in general, we've been all kind of B2B SaaSy, operator types. We've got about $300 million across three funds under management, and probably 50 to 60% of our dollars are founders that we met in around Boston area. Third or more of that coming from folks that we meet in the academic ecosystem. So we're definitely Boston based, deep network here, but not limited to investing in Boston. It just happens that it's where we have super deep roots and where we meet a huge chunk of the founders that we work with.
Now, do you have like a lane that you particularly are interested in these days, or is it broader? Like,
Yeah, we've kind of taken to calling them kind of majors and minors. Now, clearly, my major is fintech. I've worked at a few. I was co-founder of one, and so I kind of focus in the fintech lane. Lily spends a good bit of time in future of work type, SaaS applications, but also she's made a couple of really great investments in insurtech. So I would consider that one of her lanes. Rich is kind of our resident deep thinker slash nerd. He spends a ton of his time kind of obviously in AI and machine learning. He's made a bunch of investments on the crypto side. Brian was most recently promoted to partner on our team, and he's kind of been digging into just things like supply chain and logistics and things like that. So we've got these lanes where if something kind of comes in, it's a pretty obvious fit. But in general, as a firm, if you look at this category of B2B software, we're generalists. And I look at stuff that's outside of fintech, and we'll all look at something if it's B2B software, and we love the founders because early stage investing is about human beings. You're making a bet on the founding team for the most part, and so that's kind of job one, is to find what we call super spiky founders, right? People that are couple deviations from the norm and kind of ability or talent or charisma or whatever it is.
now what are some of the portfolio companies under like the investments you've made?
So I've made obviously several since I've been here. One kind of right out of the gate was a company called Pagos, and it was some ex-execs, won't surprise you one bit, from Braintree, that they basically for 10 plus years, they were at Braintree selling to kind of, the payments groups and the largest e-commerce merchants in the world. As you can probably imagine, over 10 years, they heard all sorts of tales about things they wish they had or wished that PayPal had built for them or one of their other payment processors had built for them. And they basically founded a company that solved all those problems. So it's payments optimization and intelligence for the largest e-commerce providers in the world. Another one's a company called Card. It's getcard.com. They built the worst first ad tech network on the top of transactional data. And so kind of New York based company, but this is the one I told you I kind of sat in a pitch. It was kind of before I'd even joined the firm. I sat in and I liked it so much that I put my own money into it. And then kind of took over the management when I joined the firm. But that's a New York based company. They're doing kind of super well, probably going to start to raise a Series B towards the end of the year. I mentioned Lily does a bunch of stuff in InsurTech. Is a company called Herald API, which is it's like a one-to-many API for the commercial insurance industry. It's kind of like a plaid layer in front of commercial insurers, so that companies just have one-stop shopping to go get quotes and bind insurance policies. And then even a company called Busright that was actually part of an incubator for us, kind of way back in the day, but it's basically infrastructure for managing school buses, basically completely turning a school bus into with tablet computers and iPhone apps so that parents can track their kids. They can have automatic routes programmed in. One kid's not going to be there at the bus stop, the route gets reprogrammed, and they're doing incredible. And a lot of people don't know this, but it's the largest kind of vehicle fleet in the U.S., bigger than any public transportation system, is school buses. It's like, I don't know the
Wow.
exact number, but it's like 500,000 or something. It's like bigger than any public transportation system is the school bus fleet across the US. It's
And it
gigantic.
generally tends to be a mess for every school district.
Well, yeah,
So,
yeah, right. Well, and if you've got kids, it's like,
yeah.
and it's super stressful for parents too. So we look, as you can tell, we look at lots of different stuff. Like, it's not, if you're selling to businesses, and it's largely software based, we'll take a look. Earlier the better too.
Well, so what's the best way to get on your radar, and like what do you expect out of a first meeting?
So the best way to get onto our radar, is to, come to one of the many events that we host or attend. I'm going to an event tonight, a C10 event, and so we spend a lot of time out in the ecosystem. Our kind of day restarts at 5, where we go out and do kind of, these mixers and kind of networking events, all that stuff. And so I'm very much a face-to-face person. It works best for me if someone bumps into me and, over a beer and just kind of tells me their story. And then of course, getting introductions, stalk LinkedIn, find a friend of a friend, and get someone to send us a note saying, hey, I know this person. I think they're sharp. It's tough. The cold emails are tough, although, I open all mine, but it's tough because you can probably imagine, we get hundreds a day, and we can't possibly digest all of them. So, excuse me, it always helps to have some sort of kind of warm intro. And we do spend an enormous amount of time kind of on the campuses, Harvard, MIT, Northeastern, et cetera, putting ourselves out there so that we can, judge pitch contests and office hours and all that stuff. But all that stuff works.
And what's the investment process like once it's like, okay, there's something here, and you like how does the process work till
So typically, you have a meeting with someone at the firm, whether it's Gabby, who's our associate, or any of the partners. There's kind of an initial meeting, and I like to think we're pretty good at being, crisp on responses, and is it either a fit or not after that first meeting, and then we respond pretty quickly. From there, after meeting one person, we have what we call a concurring partner model. So it takes two of us. The two of the investing partners have to agree in order to make an investment. And so if a partner really likes an investment opportunity, then their next job is to actually get one of the other partners along for the ride, to ride side saddle, but also to play devil's advocate. Because you want to be very careful that you don't kind of fall in love with something and you get tunnel vision, and you need someone, you need the devil on your shoulder that's saying, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? But if you get two concurring partners to agree and like it enough, then it'll go typically to what we call the full partner meet. Historically, it's been Monday mornings, although we're not so strict about that anymore. But to meet the whole team, and then we literally have a scorecarding process where we rank on a bunch of attributes and do it, and have a structured conversation after all those partner meetings, and we're typically making a decision in a day or two after that.
got it. Okay. Now, just as a plug, Underscore has a whole section on their website called Startup Secrets with a ton of great content for entrepreneurs to check out, videos. And one of the videos that you recorded was focused on pitch advice. So I did want to spend some
Oh,
time to talk about, you know, I think founders sometimes don't necessarily understand the importance of the storytelling, right? Like what brings somebody in, like leans in to like get interest, and then obviously do further due diligence. But so what advice do you have around that? Like you're gonna bump into someone tonight. What's your pitch advice for that person?
so you'll get lots of different answers from different people, and how you tell the story and what a pitch deck looks like and a pitch looks like varies widely, kind of from stage to stage. I know in that particular video, I kind of harped on storytelling because it's something that resonates with me, and I just happen to think it's one of the most important characteristics of a good founder is to create a narrative. And the reason I say that is because the the early days job of a founder is to tell a story to investors, to get capital, to tell a story to potential colleagues and coworkers or co-founders that you want to join you, and to have some charisma and excitement and enthusiasm to be able to tell them why they should chew up the next 7 or 8 years of their life to kind of join you. And then storytelling for getting those first customers, because when when it's two founders and a PowerPoint deck, it's not always easy to land that first customer. And so to me, it's one of those skills that's at the top of the heap for how you kind of make progress in the very early days as a founder. You can go online and find endless great templates, in my view, of what a pitch deck looks like. But if you've got, my ear or a VC's ear or a customer's ear or potential co-founder's ear for 2 minutes at a mixer, you got to get that 2 minute storytelling arc down on what you're doing and why it matters. So that's why I harp on that. But this whole entire book's written on kind of how you sell your startup. So.
But and it requires practice too. You shouldn't just be like have your story that you need to have it gel well. You need to be like an arc, like it's just a
And you have to tell
why.
everybody every time you get a chance for exactly that reason, because, especially in the early days when you're trying it out, you have to have high enough EQ to understand what's landing and what's not. And you understand by the questions that are being asked. And many people do this without even thinking about it, but you're altering your story slightly every time you get a little bit of that feedback. And so after practicing and doing it, but you should do it constantly. You should enter every pitch to contest that you can. You should pitch it on an elevator, pitch it in a bar, pitch it to your parents, and you'll learn from the questions people ask you and how stuff lands, how to refine it. Better not to practice, first time on a VC, but
And like just like so I
stub your
think
toe. I just never toe with other people. So.
I just think like times I've talked to entrepreneurs or I think about the VentureFizz pitch, it's like it's I think most investors probably want to hear a personal connection as to the why. Like, why are you uniquely qualified? Why are you driven to solve this problem? Not just I was sitting around and I heard about this AI thing and I'm going to tackle this because it hasn't been disrupted yet. No, there's like I worked at Braintree for 10 years and I saw this problem over and over again and it is a void and we are solving it and here's what we need to solve it. So it needs to have that personal connection where it should just be like authentic in terms of the storytelling. Like you might need to tighten it up or make it more crisp, but it should be very authentic.
Well, you
So,
landed
and
on something. We have a word, we have a phrase for that. We call it "right to an opinion." We want founders that have a right to an opinion about the problem that they're solving, and that, in my view, that right to an opinion can come from lived experience, including your parents running a hardware store or whatever. It could, but I also believe you can learn it, and you can develop a right to an opinion if you go into a rabbit hole and just learn a ton around an industry. But there needs to be some internal flame, and intelligence about what you're doing that goes beyond sitting with two buddies over a beer and saying, hey, let's start a company. Which one can we make the most money on, right?
all right, something else that I saw you commenting about, I forget if it was LinkedIn or Twitter or something, but um, it was advice for founders on building out the company's compensation structure as it scales and how companies actually fumble that because maybe at the early stages they're doing something one way. And then as they scale, it's like, oh, this isn't scalable, how we're paying people, or the compensation structure is not, consistent across different levels or whatever the case may be. So what should early stage founders be thinking about as it relates to compensation?
Well, the first hurdle, of course, in early stages is figuring out equity compensation, and that's so fraught that it's one of the leading causes of death of startup is getting that wrong, and someone doesn't give enough equity, and the founder splits, and all that can kind of create super toxic dynamics, and so kind of nail that with your between founders and co-founders. So that's the big boulder that if you can screw up in the early days and it can actually kill your company. The other stuff has more to do with who you're trying to hire, what level of people you need to hire for the particular stage of the company. When you're a pre-seed company, do you need a CFO? No. Even if you know the perfect one, bringing someone in and paying them $250,000 a year when you don't have any revenue doesn't make any sense, right? And so, I think and very often in early stage companies, there's a period of time, even for the founders, where they may not be paying themselves anything or kind of little to nothing. And so it's not so much comp. Like, there's enough data sets now on what kind of standard comp is, and generally speaking, startups won't won't be in the 99th percentile for comp. They'll be somewhere below 50%, generally speaking, in the early stage. And you have people that are primarily, working and hoping for kind of value coming from their equity. But what you can't have is outliers. Like you can't create a situation where someone you just wanted so bad, so bad to join the company, and you're paying them something kind of either over market or too much for the stage of your company. And so it's in the early stage, it's that sort of stuff. It gets way more complicated when you get to 100 people, and then you're really worried about, here's the levels, here's the range we pay. We don't really deviate from that and all that stuff. I don't know if that's
All right.
answering your question, but that's kind of how I think of
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So three apps you can't live without, can't be Slack, Calendar, or Gmail.
It's like, well, that's it then. That's all I got. So I got WhatsApp. So it's WhatsApp. Increasingly, I'm using it. I just made my first investment with the guy in Latin America, and certainly VCs are using WhatsApp increasingly. I think I'm convinced it's because it's much harder to end up in discovery with lawyers. But WhatsApp for sure one. Well, for me anyway, Spotify, obviously that's pretty easy. Oh, and my other big app, I'm a weather nerd. Radar Scope.
Radar Scope. Haven't heard of that one.
Radar Scope. So that's like
Okay.
direct feed from the national weather radars. No delay. You can pay for a subscription, and you can literally see when a storm's about to hit you. It's like just a weather nerd in me.
And like one of the things that I love about your website is that each person has their own Spotify playlist on your bio.
Playlist. Yeah, no, that's
And like this is totally the different genres, like not just one specific. Like you got alternative, you've got current, like Lord and old school Daryl Hall and John Oates, like all amazing.
I think I'm gonna
This
have to
is
update that, but it's a yeah, no, I have a let's just say eclectic music taste. But
me too.
push
Yep.
comes to shove, I'm a 90s guy, but
Yep. All right, book or podcast that you'd recommend to entrepreneurs.
yeah. So I'm gonna give you VC books because I think when I became a VC here, I was like, guys, like, what do I know about I don't know anything. They're like, hey, read these two books, you'll like them. And one, The Secrets of Sand Hill Road, is actually quite good for entrepreneurs as well, because it kind of gives you a good overview. It's kind of, I think it's probably going to be on most top 10 lists for VCs. And then the other one is for VCs specifically, is a book called Power Law, um, which explains the tortured economics of our business, and kind of what it means to be a venture investor and an early stage investor. And the punchline is that we need, like, if we invest in 50 companies, we need 2 or 3 to be really great, and 4 or 5 to be pretty good, but most of the returns come from those two, and we need to find those two. Which means we need to invest in companies that have a chance at becoming what we call venture scale, and that's kind of north of $100 million, with an outcome depending on the macroeconomics of whatever, unicorn or not. And the counterintuitive part for some founders is that most companies don't get there. You can, as a founder, you can build a really, really great company, maybe not raise VC, maybe get small business loans, maybe get some loans from your parents, or whatever, build a company that's doing 10 or $12 million in revenue, sell it at some point, you own the whole damn thing, and make tons of money. And it's
Way
like,
more than we
that's
could make with a
okay. Like,
venture.
and
Like,
that's
yeah,
okay, right? It's so easy to get caught up in the whole, venture capital startup ecosystem, when the fact of the matter is, most businesses, you can build incredible businesses without that. And so, it's just, the Power Law explains why VCs invest the way they do, because they're looking for home runs.
great books. I shockingly, I don't think those have ever been brought up. So, and we always like
Well, for me,
recap it every year.
I didn't know anything about VC from the investor perspective. To me, those are just two, and anything else, I'm going to give you like science fiction recommendations or something.
What do you like to do for fun outside of work?
I bike, mostly mountain bike these days. Got a recording studio in my garage, and so I still play some music. I used to play in bands back in the day. My kids all play, so I get to play with them. That's pretty fun. I
That's
fish
fun.
once in a while.
Wow. You play
That's pretty
guitar, drums? What do you play?
Uh, I mostly guitar these days. I
Very
got two
cool.
drummers in the house. My two of my sons are drummers, and so I got plenty of crazies that can play the skins.
That's awesome. Well, Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story, obviously all the great companies you've been involved in, the advice, and obviously what you and the team are up to at Underscore.
Yeah, no, it's super fun. Thanks for having me.